Rachel McAlpine, and I'm learning how to be old today from my big sister, Jill Nuthall. She talks about various skills she learned as a child, particularly people skills like leadership and teamwork. I won't mention housework and budgeting and cooking and stop me here. Anyway, those were the foundation for what became a fascinating career as a social worker. She also knew the importance of good research and documentation. Maybe she caught some of that from her lovely husband, Graham Nuthall, who was a professor of education at Canterbury University. The most prestigious honour Jill ever received was a magic month as a resident scholar at the Rockefeller Foundation in Bellagio, northern Italy. Anyway, it was by writing a memoir that she called A Joyful Working Life that Jill could see that certain themes ran through her life, and she recommends that other people do the same thing. Look back and write about your working life. It may help you to notice what skills you have and what you've achieved. Appreciate that. Now that, you see, is a Jill thing. It's always about community. It's never about her. Okay, so today I have the blessing of my very own big sister Jill with me. So Jill, thank you so much for coming along on my podcast.
A pleasure, Rachel.
So we had the same upbringing, 6 girls in a busy household, and we're going to talk today about your transferable skills, because women particularly gain so many skills just through life, and let alone in work, and you've had a phenomenal working life. So we're going to talk about that progression. Right, and we're going to start right back in childhood when you were the big sister, the oldest sister of 6 girls, a role of leadership that was thrust upon you by an accident of birth.
Yes.
And when I think about it, I think of all that you did. I mean, unsung, really. What did we learn from our parents? What did you learn that you put into practice there?
We learned responsibility. We learned how to work as a team.
Yeah.
And that was probably the most important thing.
That was something you couldn't help being the oldest one, but plenty of older sisters might have been.
Yes, it's not always the case.
No, but you had us organised to do the housework because our mother wasn't especially interested in that. And so you had us all working together, and we thought you were bossy, did we?
Oh, yes. Don't worry about that. That was just kids. Probably more important to go on to the next stage when we were in high school and frequently compared with one another. I got the label of responsible one, but not quite so competent as in academic work as others. So I realised in later life, school life never measured that in our day. Nowadays they do recognise leadership. And I was particularly proud when I was in the sixth form that I was elected by the girls as the head of the house. So that made up for a lot of other things.
Yes, that exactly. You're really good at that. And so that role also involved some communication, getting on with people, and knowing what was the right thing to do, but keeping everybody on board, right?
Trying
to, of course. Well, you were just a kid, really. Then you went to America. Once you got married, you had 4 children, and with those 4 children went to Illinois to do your putting hubby through the PhD role.
Do you realise that was a degree, Coach, that the wives of graduate students bestowed on each other?
Oh, good. Did you have a certificate?
I did have a certificate.
Good. I'd love to see it one day.
I'm blowed if I know where it
You
is.
sure earned it. No money, 4 kids, but you did have a gorgeous time, didn't you, in many
We did.
ways?
It was really fun, even though it was very hard work, particularly for Graham, but it was also hard work for me because in order to make enough money, I not only had my own 4 children to mind, but I took on extra children in our wee apartment.
So when you got back to New Zealand, you went back to your home in South Brighton of Christchurch, and you were kind of stuck there. You got the suburban housewife thing.
Oh yes, it was very strange. I was used to meeting interesting people at the laundromat,
Yes.
but here I had everything I needed in our own home. There was a group I had been in once before, and we set up a new branch, and as it happened, there was nobody but me to be the leader.
There you go. Yes, so you saw a need, you filled it.
It was fun.
I'm glad to hear that. And then I know, because of the book you wrote, the memoir, which you called A Joyful Working Life. Why did you call it that, Jill? That's a very strange title.
Well, I just loved working. When my youngest turned 5, within a week, I was out thinking, what am I going to do with myself now? And I applied for the only job that I felt qualified for.
Which was?
It was demonstrating custard in the supermarket. Instant custard, if you please.
Oh,
how
my
ghastly.
God. Mother would turn in her grave. Not that she was dead then.
Fortunately, sometime in the second month or third month of doing this enlightening job, along came a friend of ours to do the shopping, and he was the chief social worker of the hospital board at the time. He said, "Jill, what are you doing here? I thought you were just like all the other women that would love to work with people."
Oh, like the beauty queens.
Yes, like a beauty queen. "But you're serious, so come and see me on Monday."
Oh, far out, yes. Boy, is there a lesson there, yes.
Then began the first of many innovative jobs when he said, what we need is a social worker who worked with the terminally ill at Coronation Hospital. And I'm wanting to invite a non-nurse this time to become social worker. This will be a good place to start. So that was a very auspicious start for me, because it meant suddenly, although I was being trained alongside that by the social workers, because there were no other courses available, only Victoria University ran social work courses, and those of us who started working before the Canterbury one was available had to just learn on the job with this certificate and that.
So you got suddenly launched as a beginner social worker with great people to learn from, but bringing a lot to the job anyway.
What I was mostly working out was with the people who were there for a month's respite, what was going to happen to them next. So meeting the families, talking about possible options, finding out if there was what sort of family support they had was the most important question. But more often they were going into rest homes, so I had a handle on all the rest homes in Christchurch, and which was the least bad.
Yes, oh my God.
Yes, and as a vicar's daughter, we were used to being polite to everybody who came into the door.
Yeah.
We had to behave ourselves when we went for afternoon tea as a family in the landed gentry's places, or say politely to the tramp, "I'll just get my mother, she might give you a cup of tea."
So tell me about your dream job.
Okay, well, after being in geriatric care, I then was asked by the chief social worker, time to move on, Jill. How about go to Christchurch Hospital? And it was a marvellous learning experience. Then the course at university opened and I applied for and got in. I went into a little bit of research work, looking into new community-based services. I was always concerned that social worker got involved once a person was so bad an alcoholic his liver had gone because they were in hospital, or somebody was seriously depressed because they had a lot of personal stresses, and I thought, this is too late. I'd rather, if possible, get in earlier.
Yeah.
Hence, when the first job was offered in a pilot scheme for New Zealand to have a social worker attached to a general practice, I was lucky enough to get the job. They were community-minded doctors at Papanui Medical Centre and gave me almost full freedom to develop the job as I thought.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
It is very unusual.
Yeah, so first of all, to even have a social worker attached to a medical centre it was a pilot study, wasn't it? There were several happening in New Zealand.
Yes, there were 4 others at the time. The others faded more quickly than mine, and everybody else was acting as a counsellor only.
Oh.
Sometimes as little contact with the doctors as a note in your box to say, please see Mrs. Jones for depression, or something like that. But I took a totally different approach. I thought it should be about teamwork. And with the doctor's approval, spent quite a lot of time with the doctors and the nurses, supporting them in their roles and teaching the nurses to be the counsellors where they were the right people. They were the right people and the only people. Many of the mothers who had miscarriages or lost their baby at birth had been talking to over their pregnancy, and they had the relationship.
Yeah.
So I figured that was better if I helped them do their job, because they didn't have the confidence to realise what they were doing so well.
No.
And so I
Jill,
ran.
That is classic Jill.
Yeah. It wasn't counselling mostly that was needed. It was a good friend in a professional role who had contact with the hospital, knew what they had been through, understood and could listen well. And the doctors gave them time for us to talk through good ways of listening to people and making sure you don't interrupt and all those sort of things. And then from then onwards I could mentor them through.
Your pilot study program went on for 10 years, didn't it?
It did. And I was the only one who wrote this up with other people. So my professional papers at the time were about working with a relaxation group I started.
Yes.
That sort of job. And there's a lot of, I did also a lot of training and teaching.
Yeah.
So I taught in the medical school students that came by, the registrar that was there. I also taught nursing a couple of lessons at Polytech or something like that, and some with occupational therapists and physiotherapists and people like that. Just about teamwork.
Yes, and the group work is unusual and so valuable, I imagine.
Well, it worked sometimes, it didn't always work.
No, okay.
It's very much a matter of trial and error.
That was an amazing period, and you did amazing work. And in the end, how did it end, Jill?
Well, we had done, as I say, a lot of this research. Also, one of the senior probation officers took a year full-time researching this and one other program, I think, and writing it up. So it was written up in a way no other job like this had ever been written up. So far as I know, in English-speaking literature, virtually no other. So it was not only unusual, well, totally unknown in New Zealand.
Yes.
There may have been people doing counselling.
Social implies we're dealing with more than one person at a time here, right?
Exactly.
But why did it end?
So we'd done all this, and then I'd also had some interesting opportunities internationally, and had just won a Winston Churchill Fellowship to go and see how some developed countries are moving towards a higher emphasis on primary care instead of waiting till people are all in hospital. Yeah. Primary care is where you have the long-term relationship in those days.
Primary care, what is that for people?
That's general practice, or it is also the dentist and the pharmacist, the people that you can go directly to.
Yes, got it. Okay.
As a customer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But my official boss was the Chief Medical Officer of Health of the hospital board, and this particular one was not particularly happy about his budget being spent in primary care instead of in the hospital. And so he made the announcement that as for from the end of this year, this position would be cancelled. Whereupon 42 GPs wrote a petition to the hospital board,
petitioning them
not to cancel but to increase the numbers, saying it was no justice to cancel the one thing that was really working in primary care. So that was embarrassing, but the board still voted to side with him. So then when he offered me a junior position at Sunnyside, I declined.
I should think so.
And took a job as the first executive director of the Public Health Association.
So we've gone from primary care, meaning your
Yes.
first protocol.
Centre. I moved out of casework into teamwork.
From that, you
Yes.
moved to public health. Now, tell me
Yes.
what public health
Well,
is.
public health, the health of the public, and setting up environments, supporting anything that's working, like immunisations, but it's also working with the town planners to make sure they build healthy environments, making sure the air and the food is healthy, and
Like anti-smoking
definitely,
legislation?
that's the other one that people knew all about.
Yeah.
And the Public Health Association is not a union. It is about getting the research out into policy. So if the epidemiologists discover that, for instance, 5,000 people die of every year in New Zealand from passive smoking, then it's the policymakers, the politicians, to pass a law to say, therefore we will have smoke-free public places.
Yeah. It's a big leap, isn't it, from demonstrating custard?
So after the Public Health Association job, then again that was cancelled because of government policy, and so I applied for a new job and went to the Southern Regional Health Authority, where I became one of the community relations managers. So talking with communities about why the budget can only go so far,
Yeah.
and making sure that they understood big fact.
But that was a very hard and interesting job.
It was.
Going into a community that's absolutely furious because their local hospital is going to be closed or not do
Yes,
certain
that's
sort
right.
of surgery.
Well,
how did you?
my model, I started by going and talking to the doctors and the mayor, who are some of the leaders in your community that are interested in health. They said, well, our people have arranged to take anybody who needs transport to their hospital appointments. They were just the perfect people. So they would call a community meeting for me. Anyhow, that was a very exciting job till it was also cancelled. At that stage I was already on the Heart Foundation board and Relationship Services Board and Comcare, and so I had a way to start downsizing.
Yes, so that eased you into retirement.
Yes.
And so you thought you were retired, did you? Ha ha ha.
Right.
And then what happened, Jill?
Well, then the earthquake happened in 2011 in February. The long and short of it is, all of the townhouses in which I was then living, having lost my husband and moved to the city, had to come down. And
Why did they have to come down?
because they were unsafe to live in. Mine was the most damaged because it could have fallen down any moment.
Yeah.
So we had 11 of us owners, and a couple of months after the quake, I was elected the chair of the body corporate.
Yes.
And
it's not as if you leapt forward and said, I can deal with this. Please, pick me.
no,
It wasn't like that. No,
Yes.
but it just had to be you.
Yes, it seemed to be.
What a responsibility.
Yes, so it was a fascinating time, and we were very fortunate because we kept on side the builder, the architect, all 11 owners, and I had an all-woman committee who lasted the distance and were very good to work with.
Now, I just want to pause there because you frequently use the word fortunate or lucky. You say you were lucky, but you were fortunate that you got on well with all these people and they all worked together. Could the key factor be Jill Nuthall?
I don't know, but they were very loyal and just tremendous and proud of what we achieved.
Yeah.
Because a lawyer who knew a lot about, did a lot of earthquake work, said he only knew of 2 bodies corporate that had the ability to keep the thing together and to build again.
And not surprising when you think of the what's at stake and the emotions and the choices that people have.
Well, a lot of people just want their money and out, and they want to take the first offer.
Yeah.
But we never did.
No.
We all wanted to rebuild. That was the good thing. We had good houses, great location, and extremely good policy, a complete replacement. There were lots of difficult moments.
Well, you were dealing with the builders, the architects,
23 groups of people I counted.
23 groups of people, and
Yes.
you had to be the liaison, but not just sit there and wait till people contact you. You were thinking it through and thinking who had to know what, and
Yes, I
where
did.
to compromise.
Yes, it was a lot of judgment required. I kept our owners fully informed. I came to an agreement with the builder and the architect that we would hold a fortnightly meeting with them.
Yes.
And that I would send the minutes to them within 24 hours. I had a good secretary. And if they didn't want any alterations made, we would send them out as agreed.
Yes.
That saved a lot of trouble. They were relieved because they tried doing the minutes once and it wasn't the meeting I went to. It was leaving out all the difficult bits.
Yeah.
And that was the point of it. We had to negotiate times for the owners to look at the progress because at first it would be more convenient for the builders to just give us the finished product. It was very hard for them though because they are used to building a greenfields project. Instead, all of these people had already been living in these places and we'd all changed the interior. So we were all entitled to a replacement of what we had.
Yeah.
It was exciting work and I enjoyed it. It was hard work and came close to being taken to court personally on 3 different occasions. But we came through with very nice places.
You did, and you had to fix all the land underneath, first of all.
That was a bit difficult because the land had moved and no surveyor could tell us exactly where our boundaries were.
Gosh, so complicated. I'm just awestruck when I think of you doing that in your 80s, out of the blue, and I've heard you say that was like the biggest job you ever had.
Well, it was the most expensive job. I had to sign that I would pay $11.5 million. I said, okay, but I had a very good lawyer.
This is a funny out-of-the-blue question. I could make a list a mile long of your skill. Now you're 89 and you're going to be older still. Which of those skills are useful in your personal life?
Oh, heavens. In my personal life, I don't know. I must say that I have taken the leadership. If I could see it was going to be a person that wasn't able to get on with other people, who was the alternative, and that I was being pressed by other people to stand for something, I did accept that because I'd rather do that than mess up the organisation. So I did that a few times. But I suppose the main thing is we've got a very happy family. My kids, they all get on together, and they were talking the other day in their 60s. Mm-hmm. Of course, my parenting was done with a very wonderful father.
And you learn from each other too, don't you?
Yes, I learned from him. He was after all an educator.
But so things that you learnt at your mother's knee, like cooperating and getting along, and actually leaving the world a better place is another thing we learned from our father. That. It's perfectly obvious from what you're saying that you weren't trying to make the world a worse place, and you weren't in your work for personal glory or...
just because it was interesting, really.
Yeah, that's right, because that's why it was a joyful life.
That's right.
A joyful working life.
Well, the other thing was there were quite a lot of women who would love to have had a job, who were very skilled, but were ambivalent about what to try for.
You were willing to go along and demonstrate custard in a supermarket.
That was pretty...
I love it.
It was a good start, I suppose.
Yeah, you're not going to be allowed to forget that one.
Dear.
Yeah, and so in your personal life, I see a Jill who understands other people, sees things from their point of view, and sees the bigger picture and helps other people to get along and achieve things. And I also see a problem solver. And that goes on and on and on and on.
Yes, well, I no longer feel any need to fix the world
No.
or anything like that.
You've done your dash, Jill. Another thing that was very prominent in your working life is thinking community, not thinking individuals, but thinking also of the community, and you're right there in a community, and you're noticing and appreciating and interacting with them. So that in old age, that's gold. That's pure gold.
Yes.
Right?
Well.
Oh dear. Is there anything else you'd like to say at this point?
Well, thank you, Rachel. It was actually writing that little memoir that made me realise how things had happened. I didn't know any of these were skills. The themes that came through only came through for me when I wrote that little book, so that was fun.
It was a brilliant idea to write about your working life, and I think lots and lots of people would benefit from that for that very reason.
I think so too.
Especially women who don't realise that they're bringing these great gifts, not just doing an ordinary job.
Yes.
It's special.
Or teachers who can organise anything.
Yeah. I think that you scratch any old person, they've had an extremely interesting life in which they've learnt a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. A few years ago, I wrote a poem for my big sister, Jill. She was born in 1936, when Hitler was already feeling his oats. Okay, here it is. That's the book. Poem for my big sister, Jill. You were a juicy baby, born on the darkest day when armies were marching and peace was sliding away. Now, 80 years later, I long to give you on a plate the thing you lack, the gift that all big sisters need. Your very own big sister, just like our Jill, to shelter and protect you and hold your hand and take the lead on dark days and on bright days too, the way big sisters do. That's all. I'm done. Thanks for listening to my podcast, and hey, tell somebody else about it if you like it, or maybe you might even think it could help someone. Bye for now.